Welcome to the FYG podcast, everybody, for episode 2. Today I'm joined by a good friend, RetroResurrection, and another good friend, Mr. WizzardofMight. How are you both doing today?
Well, how about yourself?
I'm doing very well. Have you been keeping yourselves busy this week? What have you been doing?
Has been a busy week.
Yeah. A busy week, right. What have you been busy doing? Have you been busy working? Have you been busy?
He can't say. He could tell you, but then he might have to kill you.
Yeah, he's under contract.
Yeah, right.
None of these words can be spoken outside of the office. I'm going to say it's a lot of work stuff that's keeping you busy.
Yes, a lot of work stuff.
Right. And how about you, Retro? Obviously, your recent outings on Twitch. I caught that.
Yeah, I've been back on Twitch for the last couple of nights, afternoons or evenings. Been doing a lot of work around the house, getting some painting wrapped up, and obviously the job's also keeping me busy. So a lot of different fields.
Yeah, Retro recently posted pictures online showing the shelving units that he'd placed and all of his collection that he's got up on the shelves.
I should clarify. I posted them in Discord. I did not just publicly post them online for all to see, because that's something I keep a little bit close to the chest. But in private Discord communities, I'll post that.
Yeah, it looked very good anyway. For those of you that were wondering, it looked very good.
Well, thank you. What was your biggest takeaway from that? Did you eye gravitate towards something?
You had far more Genesis games than I thought you would.
I was surprised by that myself.
Yeah, for some reason I never, in my head, maybe because I've always thought you were leaning more towards Nintendo, that you just wouldn't have as much Genesis stuff. And then when I saw it, I thought, oh, okay, yep, that's a fair amount of Genesis games.
And it's a testament actually to Genesis games in general in the resale market. You can find complete in-box copy Genesis games so much more readily than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's just weird. I mean, they're durable. That's why.
The boxes,
rugged plastic boxes. So they survive like a nuclear explosion practically.
Yeah, I've got a few of those myself. You know, when you find the odd one where it's got someone's name written on the inside, and you've got to scrub it off with alcohol or something.
Oh no, you don't do that. If it's on the cartridge, yeah. But I actually like to keep those little things. If it's written on an insert, or especially in the manual, you get a manual that has one of those time, best time on a racing game. I have a copy of Outrun that has the back of that manual completely filled out. I'm just way to go, Sarah! In the summer of '89, you really rocked at Outrun.
I think the cartridge I've got for Altered Beast, it has. So I don't remember the girl's name. It is a girl, but it was a birthday present for somebody. And it's to Lisa, Merry Christmas, love Mum and Dad.
That's awesome.
I bought a piece of someone's childhood, apparently, without realizing it.
Have you ever thought about trying to find the person and say, hey, I had this. Do you want it back?
I should post it on social media and see if anybody comes back.
Yeah, man, you might be on the news. They'll be like, oh, man, you reunited your child.
Reunited with your childhood memories, yeah.
Have you ever found anything super weird inside of a game when you bought it on resale market?
Receipts, as in someone's kept. So there's a receipt history of the various transactions that the game has been through, either handwritten or correctly printed through a shop. But yeah, I do. I have a few of those.
Page out of a ledger book or something.
Yeah, I've got somewhere where it's it's biro on receipt paper, and it's John sold game for £4 and a date, for example.
I owe you one favor for this game.
Yeah, pretty much. But no, there's nothing been out of place, like in strange or bizarre. How about yourself? Yeah, I mean, your collection's far greater than mine, so I'm sure you would.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is because I wanted to. This is just a funny story from collecting. I bought a Saturn game. I forget which one it was, but when I brought it home, opened it up, and I was cleaning it. I could do all this stuff, just get it ready to go up on the shelf. And I opened it up, and there was something tucked back behind the manual. I was just like, oh, what's this? Like an extra insert? No, it was a court summons.
Wow.
It was a traffic court summons. I'm guessing for the guy that used to own that game, but it was dated like 1994. I forget what he was pulled over for. It was like expired registration or something like that.
Wow. I mean, I couldn't think of a more apt place to put your court summons than in the box for one of your video games. Keep it perfectly safe in there. I'm sure you won't forget about it.
I hope he made his court date. That's my first thought. Back in 1994.
Yeah, I'm sure you could go back and find this person then. Do you remember that traffic incident that you got into in the summer of '94?
Yeah, did that all resolve well enough? Yeah. What was the fine? What did you have to pay?
Did you take any points on your license? But yeah, well, I'm glad that both of you are doing very well. Thank you for joining me this week. So this week I wanted to go into the subject of game difficulty. Something we all experience: easy, normal, hard, extremely hard, insanely hard, stupidly hard, impossible, extreme, extremely impossible. You know, unwinnable, unbeatable. And I was curious about your experience with game difficulty with the recent Dread mode that's been made recently available on Metroid Dread, which we'll circle round to eventually, Retro, when I want to come back to you and speak to you about that one. But the subject of game difficulty and making games difficult for difficult purposes, or games that are made insanely easy to hold people's hands, depending on the type of games that they are. So I suppose the question I'm going to ask is, where do you stand on game difficulty? How would you, if you were to pick up a brand new game, what difficulty would you start it on? And why would you start it on that difficulty?
I would typically start on like normal. Anytime I pick up a brand new game, I usually interpret like the developers, if they created a normal, whatever they classify it as normal, that's the intended experience. And so I'll try my best to play a game and beat it on that normal difficulty. I usually try to shy away from anything that would be like a lesser difficulty than that.
Mm-hmm. For what reason do you normally? Just because you want the game to be a challenge, or you don't want to breeze through it quickly, or?
Usually, yeah. Any game I pick up, regardless of the genre, I at least want to feel like I'm being actively engaged. I'm being forced to learn something about the game, its mechanics, and to implement those mechanics either, as intended, but also possibly even kind of apply them in like creative ways. Mm-hmm. So find like new combos. Like you have an RPG that has like Tales of Arise. RPG that has a bunch of interrelated party combat mechanics to try to like learn how to maneuver with those mechanics, especially in something like that which has like an active combat scenario. You got to think quick, you got to be on your toes, you got to be really quick with the button inputs. So as long as I feel like my skills are improving because the game is forcing me to learn how to use those mechanics, that's I think where like my happy place is for games, where I feel like I'm being actively involved in the game. You're
being challenged, and through the challenge you're learning, or you're becoming better.
Yeah.
Okay, and same question to you then, Wiz. What difficulty would you normally enter games at? Where would you sit in that?
Well, typically with most games, I tend to pick a lot of story games, so I will pick the easiest difficulty as I can, because unfortunately I get very frustrated. Too difficult for me to play something, so I'll just throw it down and be like, oh well, I don't want to play this, it's too hard. So so what I typically do for a lot of games, pick the easiest, just because I want to see what the story is like, and of course we're all busy, we all have jobs, we all have other things. I just don't have time to play games, so I don't have time, as Retro described, to learn the game, and I just don't have the patience to learn it. Most of the time I just want to know what the story is. What is the story of the developer?
Yeah, what's the story?
That way. Yeah.
And busy lives. I could certainly understand why somebody would choose a more casual experience when playing a very cinematic game, like maybe something like Detroit Become Human, where where it's, essentially it's a multiple choice quick time event video game, and it's a very cinematic experience. There's very minimal controlling in the sense, and playing on casual might make that experience just flow a little easier than potentially a harder difficulty that might make those decisions grossly more difficult or possible to get incorrect for whatever reason. Poor outcomes for characters that you didn't want to happen because you didn't maybe fully understand the decisions that you were making. For example, I mean, I'm going to harken back to my experience with Detroit Become Human. I think I played that game on the complete normal difficulty. I'm not even sure that game has difficulty settings, but if it does, I played that game on normal difficulty with the idea of certain characters, me focusing heavily on certain characters to give them a good ending, for it to be shoved in my face, and for me to essentially end the game with a bitter taste in my mouth, which it was a fairly negative bitter taste in my mouth because I thought I'd done everything I possibly could, and then realised there was one decision at the end that skewed that entirely in the wrong direction, and frustration as a result of that, which could have been made easier maybe, or a little bit more forgiving, maybe on an easier difficulty, let's say.
Yeah. And it's interesting you bring up Detroit Become Human as well, because that's while the difficulty spectrum may be pretty narrow for that game also involves a lot of reevaluating past decisions that you've made and determining whether you want to go back and play it again to see how that conversation could have gone differently. Mm-hmm. So it's like how much is the developer actually valuing your time as a gamer, because they've crafted how many innumerable different outcomes, or not outcomes, but just overall play experiences through Detroit Become Human. There's tons of them. Yeah, so
pathways.
in that kind of game, if there was an option for you to go back and play it and experience it again as a different storyline, you say you don't have a lot of time for games like that. Is that something you'd even consider? Or do you want to just move on to the next game?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Playing Detroit Become Human, I wanted to finish that as quickly as possible because I wanted to try Heavy Rain. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to try Beyond Two Souls, the other two games developer. If it was difficult enough that, it would take me a lot. I mean, for that game probably is not a good example of one that will take you longer to finish. Some other type of games that are heavy on story, like, for example, Jedi Fallen Order, that one I would play on easy as well, just because I just want to know the story. I didn't want to have to deal with the frustration of constantly dying, and then not be able to complete the game quickly enough to know the story and then move on to the next game.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be frustrated at not knowing how the game ends because maybe the game is too difficult to get to that point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The game gets in its own way. Sure, I could totally understand that. Yeah, I could totally understand that. So if we circle then back to Metroid Dread for a moment, and the recent announcement at the last Nintendo Direct that they'd be introducing the Dread mode, which is the insanely difficult mode, the hardest difficult mode, which is, what is it, a one-hit kill? Doesn't matter what touches you in that game, a one-hit kill?
Well, yeah, it is a one-hit kill mode. It's any enemy projectile or boss, if they so much as touch Samus dies. What I thought it was basically anything that could deal damage to you will instantly kill you, but that's actually not the case. As we discovered on my first stream of playing through Dread mode, environmental hazards will actually not instantly kill Samus.
Okay, so that is the hot doors and the cold doors and...
Yeah, exactly. Like when Samus doesn't have the right suit, she's vulnerable to extreme heat and extreme cold really early on in the game. I was of the understanding that if I even set one toe through one of those doors into a hot or cold environment, that Samus would die. So that's how I was playing the game. But there actually is a couple of points in the game where you're forced to actually go into a hazardous environment just temporarily. And so, as you can imagine, if that's the way they design Dread mode, then it would be impossible to beat it on Dread mode. So,
yeah, no, totally. I mean, from what I saw of you play for that game, although you accumulated as many deaths as you did by the end, I think it was 104 deaths last time, right?
You've got to the end of the second stream. Yeah.
a lot of those, you said that they could have been preventable, like maybe rushing through it or not taking your own advice that the rules that you set beforehand. But
I had some rules before. I'd set some rules for myself before I started streaming Dread Mode. One of them is, and if anybody's out there that's going to be thinking about playing Dread Mode, if you haven't played the game in months like I have, and have just dove straight into Dread Mode like I did, you go through a door, you do not move from that door until you have surveyed what's in front of you.
No unnecessary steps required.
Yeah. You do not just rush headlong into a new screen.
Okay. So you've actually, like you mentioned there, you've actually had 2 streams of this now, so a good few hours into Dread Mode. You've been making steady progress, am I right? You've not been stuck in any particular place?
No, I have not been stuck. There was one boss yesterday. It was the second stream. So the third boss that I came across on that stream, it's like a mechanized Chozo warrior that you come across. It's the second time that you've seen one. That guy is considerably difficult. And I was thinking about it after the fact, because I was just having a bitch of a time killing him. He killed me 30 times before I finally got him down.
Wow. So he almost accounted for a third of deaths by the end of your second playthrough.
That boss fight alone, which he's the current winner of which bosses killed me the most, but there are a couple of bosses coming that I know are probably they're going to really pad their counts. But I was having a bitch of a time killing him, but I got him down. And then I thought about it after the stream, and I realized that the reason that boss fight was so hard is because of where Samus is currently in the progression of the game. He is a brick wall, basically. I forgot about this in my normal and hard mode runs. You come across this guy at a point where your arsenal is actually pretty puny, and he has a considerable amount of health, and you're forced to basically exhaust your resources trying to take him down. But that's the only point so far where I have been really pushed, my back up against a wall, and it's stretched my skills to almost the limit, trying to get him down, just because he has so much health. Yeah.
So if the game is if Dread Mode is difficult to be difficult, it's meant for experienced players. It's not a mode that a new player would normally attempt, unless you're extremely experienced with Metroid games and all of the pitfalls and that you would typically expect from a classic Metroid game. Do you think the difficulty takes away from the game in any way? Do you think it's less the game itself is less enjoyable because of the risks of being so vulnerable?
I would say no. Just like you said, this is a mode that not just anybody should dive into, unless you have lightning like reflexes and pick up on these kind of games really quick. And Metroid Dread is not. It takes a lot of inspiration from classic games, but it actually plays very differently than the classic games. Like Super Metroid, if you played it after playing Metroid Dread, would feel like you're just running through molasses the entire time. Dread is very snappy. Samus controls very, very acutely. Like any little input on the jump button or the stick, and you get reaction from her. So you have to be very, very accurate with your movements. But she does move very deftly. So as long as you've gotten a feel for how she controls, then you can just basically run circles around things practically. Actually, that was another thing that was happening on the second stream, is I was finding that my reflexes had been honed enough that I was actually juking the Emmy robots much more deftly than I had in previous playthroughs.
And these Emmys are these sentinel-like robots that chase you through certain parts of the map, right?
They're the terrifying, indestructible robots that you come across at various points in the story. And until you find a certain upgrade, and there's multiples of these upgrades. Basically, you have to find a weapon that can destroy them. So spoilers, sorry if you've never played Dread, but that's just how it works. Until you can get your hands on that upgrade, they're unkillable, and they're just after you if you get detected. And one of them I actually managed to counter when they had caught me twice.
Yeah,
and that's something I was like, I performed that maybe once in my normal and hard mode playthroughs, and all of a sudden on Dread, I'm just like my senses were just so attuned because I was so aware. I had to be aware of everything that was going on, and it's just in our part it was probably just dumb luck too. I pressed the button at the right time.
Mm-hmm. I'd heard the parries in that game were they're very precisely timed. They're very unforgiving. When you get caught by an enemy and they give you that one last opportunity to break free from the run.
Yeah, no, that's precisely the melee counters in normal combat, even against bosses, are somewhat forgiving. And this goes on even into like hard mode and dread mode. The timing windows for those don't change, but the enemies, like the timing windows compared to normal enemies and bosses for the counters, if you compare them to the enemies, it's a fraction of that. It's like maybe 3 frames that you actually have to get the button input to actually counter them.
Right. Okay. So,
but
my question to you then, Wiz, is if for example, in a perfect world, you had all the time in the world to play a game like Metroid Dread, and there were no concerns for time. Metroid Dread is a single-player campaign game with bosses that you have to fight along the way, but it's very story-driven. Would the introduction of an insanely difficult game mode ever interest you? If you had all the time in the world to tackle that, or do you think you would still play it through the intended difficulty, maybe normal, or even go even easier and just go straight through it on easy? Do you think that's like an inherent trait that you have when you play video games? You just go because you just want to fly through them and go to the next one, or do you think you would welcome more of a challenge if you had the time?
Well, it's I would first play the game through probably on easy, just so I know how
mechanics,
the controls,
bosses, story.
The story. I know everything. Then I would go back and play it again. The issue we have in the current world is there's so many different games I can play, right? So what makes me think I would just go back to it and play it on a very difficult mode versus, I've got 20 other games on my list that I got to get to. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to that. Sure, and then, of course, maybe I'll say, hey, I'll try that mode later. Yeah. But later might be years.
Come back to it. Right? We always say these things to ourselves, don't we? As video gamers, we always say to ourselves, you know what? I'll come back to this, and then several years later, somebody plays it on Switch. Yeah, you forget you have the game. Someone streams it on Switch, and it kind of reignites your passion to want to dip your toe back in. That tends to be that's happened to me multiple times. Inspiration from watching other people play it. After not having played it for a long time myself.
Well, just for you, they added rookie mode to Metroid Dread. So,
great!
If you've been on the fence about playing Metroid Dread, there you go. There's a rookie mode.
Rookie mode is, I'm assuming, is the easy mode, right?
It is easy. Yeah, it Samus recovers a lot more health and ammunition from from pickups, and then enemies and bosses deal less damage.
Is there a god mode?
Not that I haven't heard of that, but maybe that's going to be coming in a future patch. We'll see.
Okay, so moving the conversation along, I wanted to speak to you chaps about the recent Nintendo Direct. At date of recording this, we're a week or so away from the announcement that they made at the Nintendo Direct, maybe a little bit longer. But I wanted to talk to you about it because there were some great announcements. I think it was a very positive Nintendo Direct. Many people might argue otherwise, but there were a few new games that got announced, ones that we didn't know that were in active development, with the aim of them coming to the first half of 2022, or if not the first half of 2022, definitely within 2022.
Yeah, Xenoblade, I'm looking at you.
But first of all, did you both manage to catch the Nintendo Direct, and what did you think of it? What were your initial thoughts, if you did?
I thought it was decent. I didn't think it was a great direct. Then again, I was coming from the same kind of camp that you see a lot of the memes talking about how this was a direct that was slated. It was gonna be focused on the first half of 2022, and then everybody just like literally flips a shit because there's no talk about Breath of the Wild 2. I kind of am in that camp. I at least wanted to get a teaser, especially since they showcased Xenoblade Chronicles 3 right at the end, and that thing does not have a release date until to be determined September of 2022.
Yeah.
So they kind of they didn't even follow their own rules with this direct, but disregarding that, I thought it was a pretty decent direct. There were a few standouts, but the majority of the time it was either tepid reception or I was just kind of disgusted by what I was seeing.
Well, disgusted isn't a word I thought I was going to hear, but fair enough.
And that only pertains to really a couple of the announcements. I think we all know what one of them is.
I can guess what one of them is. Yeah, totally.
But no, that was certainly not the majority of my reaction. It was either excitement mixed with kind of oh, okay, I didn't realize we needed another one of those, or that's not the direction I thought they were going to take with that. Right.
And how about you, Wizard? Same question to you. Did you manage to check out the direct? Were you around, or?
Yeah, and I have to say it inspired me to want to buy a Nintendo Switch, but I still have not made that jump yet.
For Dread mode, right?
Oh yeah, for Dread mode, yes.
Exclusively for Metroid Dread,
yeah. Exclusive to that, but yes, I haven't. I was able to check it out, but I.
Okay, so I'm not sure if either of you have managed to have a look through the summary for the Nintendo Direct, or if I shout some things out here, it might spark memory. But really, I wanted to. So Retro, earlier you mentioned that there were a few standouts for you personally. I wanted to understand what were your standouts. What were the games you were most excited for? What highlights did you really got your motor going? We'll start with...
one of them did actually have motors.
Okay, that's true.
It did involve vehicles. Yeah. But actually, the biggest standout of the Nintendo Direct was Mario Strikers Battle League. Finally, we get a new a Mario Strikers game. It's the one sports series in the Mario-verse that has just not received any love in forever. The last one to come out was on the Wii. And... so it was exciting to see that they were finally going to bring that back to the masses. It's honestly, in my opinion, out of the sports titles in the Mario game, out of the Mario games, Strikers was always the most fun. It was the easiest to kind of pick up and play versus, say, Mario Golf. Like I've played a couple of hours of Super Rush, and I was just like, oh my god, I have to remember all of these different things just to make a shot, especially in a game that's designed for you to try to speed run a hole in a minute and a half. But Strikers has always been just pick up and play, good co-op fun, or even competitive. But that was my big standout. The other being the gigantic slew of DLC that's coming out for Mario Kart 8.
The Booster Course Pass, they call it.
Booster Course Pass. 48 courses. It's basically a new game. But it's going to be just tons and tons and tons of remastered courses from games throughout the Mario Kart series.
As if the amount of courses they didn't already have were far more than enough.
Yeah.
You can now have twice the amount once over with the new Booster Course Pass, which I think was priced around $24.99 in the US, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, it is very economically priced. I was surprised by that. They could have asked easily for a lot more. I mean, you could have anticipated at least a $40 price tag for that. But you do have to wait. So if you buy the pass, you can buy the patches individually.
They're coming in waves.
Course
right?
Grand Prix. Yeah, it's coming in waves. I think 8 waves total. So we'll get 2 Grand Prix, I think, each wave.
It says here the first wave due on March the 18th.
Yeah,
so very soon, next month.
Yeah.
So there were 2 games there. Were there any other highlights? If we go for 3, then is there one more that you could pick out the bunch?
Are we talking new games? Because I was going to say, I mean, obviously the addition of Metroid Dread mode was kind of like, ooh, I needed a reason to go back to play that game, so let's do it. But honestly, out of the new titles, even Xenoblade Chronicles 3 didn't really do it for me, because I just have not been able to get into that series. Splatoon 3 was, again, another really tepid reception. That was basically it, though.
Okay. And I'll turn our attention to you then, Wiz. Were there any highlights in the Nintendo Direct for you, personally? you said earlier that you don't have a Nintendo Switch, but there was some excitement around the Direct that kind of got the cogs turning in your mind, got the wallet out and the credit cards or debit cards slightly peaking, and you thought, you know what, I could just drop $250 on a new Switch and a brand new game.
Hey, there's a bunch of us, me and a bunch of older crew of mine that really enjoyed Nintendo Switch Sports, so we're very excited to see that come back. So
Nintendo
that could
Switch
be the only
Sports.
reason I'm buying this. Then again, I have to ask, guys, how nice is the OLED? Is the OLED screen any good at all?
I wouldn't know.
Okay, I was going to say you have one, Hawk.
I have the slate grey Nintendo Switch with some coloured thumbsticks on it.
Is that a launch model or one of the upgraded ones?
Oh, that's a launch model.
Oh, okay. I mean, still a good model. They last. Yeah, I would actually say the OLED screen when you're playing in handheld looks considerably better than the original, and not the original, but the default model. It also loads a little bit faster. I've noticed that games load probably 20 to 25% faster.
I've seen a lot of positive feedback about the kickstand, which was questionable on the original base models.
Yeah, on the base models, it's just that little, it's almost like a mobile phone case stand that just comes out of the back of it. But the OLED, it's like the entire bottom half of the back plate pops out as a stand. It's almost the entire width of the system.
So you'd say that if you were a new player coming to Nintendo Switch and you were thinking about buying one, the OLED should be your first point of entry, and if you can't get one of those, go for a base model.
Yeah, or if you get a base model, make sure you're getting the slightly upgraded version that has better battery life and a slightly faster processor. That's going to come in a red box, a completely red box. But yeah, I would say get an OLED first. Try if you can.
Excellent. So you said Nintendo Wii Sports, or sorry, not Nintendo Switch Sports. Christ, I'm showing my age now. Were there any other titles there, Wiz, or was that your one and only standout?
That is the one and only standout for me. Again, I don't own a Nintendo Switch, so yeah, it's one of those things where
there were a few games on there that weren't that aren't exclusive to Nintendo, and I'm looking at Chrono Cross, which retro.
Can I pause for a second?
Go for it.
Wiz, if you wanted to buy one, they're actually available on Amazon right now.
Dun dun dun.
Well, the Steam Deck comes out this month too. Now you've got two handhelds. I don't know what to do. I know I'm not going to be able to get the Steam Deck anyway.
I mean, the OLED price is higher than the base model, doesn't it? I believe. How much does that
$50 more? Yeah,
so $350.
Whereas the base
$350. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the UK, I think it actually prices at $249.99 for a Nintendo Switch, the base model, which probably works around the same price.
That would
I was.
Anyway, back to you, Hawk.
I was just saying that there are some games here that aren't necessarily exclusive to Nintendo. I'm looking at things like the Chrono Cross Radical Dreamers Edition. Of course, that's not necessarily only ever been on Nintendo consoles. The Force Unleashed, the Kingdom Hearts Cloud version, the DLC for Cuphead, Zombie Army 4, No Man's Sky, Zombie Army 4. Getsu Fumaden, which is on Steam right now. 2 Point Campus has been on every console. Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, Hinokami Chronicles. That's on all consoles. So there are some games here. You've got Taiko no Tatsujin, Rhythm Festival, which isn't exclusive to Nintendo. So there are. What I'm trying to say is there are quite a fair amount of featured games that aren't strictly Nintendo that you could very well go and buy today and play in other places if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But my highlights, I think you guys could probably guess my highlights being a huge weeb. I'm not going to put it any other way. My highlights were, I'm fairly excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I've finished Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I've nearly finished Xenoblade Chronicles. maybe an excuse to go back and actually finish that game. But I'm fairly invested in that universe. I really enjoy the combat. They are very heavily anime inspired games. You know, the stories are fairly paradoxical to anime that I might watch. You know, surface level shonen jump anime. You know, very easy to predict outcomes and characters that all follow. You know, similar traits to characters that you might find in anime and whatnot. But there were a couple of other games that I was very excited for. One of them, which I've never heard of before, which really got me off my seat as soon as I saw gameplay, which was Live Alive. Do you guys remember the coverage for Live Alive?
I do.
So if anybody out there that isn't aware of it, it was a game apparently that was already available in Eastern markets. We never got it here in the West. And essentially it follows, it's a 2D, 3D pixel video game. So think in the vein of something like Octopath Traveler and the recently announced Dragon Quest III HD remake. And the next game that I'm going to be talking about, which is a highlight, Triangle Strategy, it's very similar. It follows a bunch of characters throughout different times. And you kind of move between the characters at different timelines. And it just came out of nowhere. I welcome more 2D, 3D style video games. It's a very beautiful form of artwork, taking these kind of beautifully created pixel creations and sticking them on a 3D canvas. I really like that. It's very immersive. It's like it takes me back to games that I used to play as a child, but it gives me some kind of modern twist on it. So yeah, and then of course the other game was Triangle Strategy, which is going to be available very, very, very soon. I played the demo for that already, from the same team that developed Octopath Traveler. So those were really my main highlights. Taiko no Tatsujin got me really excited because of the amount of additional songs that particular version of the game is getting. The game is already available for you to go and play on Game Pass right now. Not Rhythm Festival. I don't think it's called Rhythm Festival on Game Pass. And it has a far inferior sized library. But who knew? I really like rhythm games. I think Taiko no Tatsujin's kind of reignited my passion for it. I've not played a rhythm game in a very, very long time. I'm looking at Beatles Rock Band is probably the last time I ever attempted a rhythm game. So
trying to think of the last time I did. Maybe Guitar Hero World Tour.
Mm-hmm.
The one that came with all the instruments.
Yeah. I was never really big into them. I kind of got into them quite late, you know, rhythm games, which is fairly bizarre considering I'm a musician. Well, I consider myself a musician. I don't really do it much nowadays with kids and whatnot, but I like theremin,
by the way, ladies and gentlemen.
I do, and I'm an amazing kazooist as well. But that was a terrible kazoo impression. But yeah, those are my highlights. Were there any games that you kind of you mentioned earlier, retro? There were some that kind of made you go. So let's talk about the worst announcements. The disappointments.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned the Force Unleashed, which when we were watching the direct, a bunch of us all together on Mill's channel, just the amount of like, ew, gross, it's so bad looking, and I think what a lot of people were commenting on is that they thought it was the 360/PS3 version of the game, and that's not what this is. This is the god awful, downgraded Wii/PS2 version of the game. That is what we're getting a port of on the Switch.
Yeah, it looked noticeably bad.
It looked worse than most Wii games or even GameCube games. It was that bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was there for that live stream, and I watched that along with the chat, and I remember seeing the announcement. Well, first of all, it was kind of just thrown in your face, right? It was very quick. It was like, The Force Unleashed is also coming to Nintendo Switch. And, I really enjoyed The Force Unleashed, both 1 and 2. I played them both on the Xbox 360. And at the time, I thought graphically they were outstanding. You know, they were very immersive. I enjoyed throwing about Star Destroyers, and you know, TIE fighters and all the extra stuff that you could play. I even played through that game twice because of the different choices you can make towards the end of the game. You know, follow the light or follow the dark. And I especially liked playing the very, very start of the first game because, of course, you get to play as Darth Vader himself, throwing Wookiees about on Kashyyyk, which is always a little bit of fun.
Yeah, there was a trophy for that, if I'm not mistaken.
There was indeed. Trophy. I played this on Xbox, mate. There was some points. Some
That's
some
what I played it on
achievements.
too. Sorry.
Get that trophy
Series
shit
X
out of here.
My Series X is sitting in the closet in its box. My PS5 is the one that's out in the living room. So.
And so when I saw the footage, in my mind, I told myself I thought the game never looked that bad when I played it originally. I'm pretty sure it never looked that bad when I played that originally. And then of course I learned later on that it was the Wii version of the game, which I didn't even know there was a Wii version of the game. I mean, it's not really a game that I would consider playing with motion controls. I suppose there were other forms of controllers you could use. Did it even work with the Joy-Cons? Were they called Joy-Cons? Wiimotes. Sorry, they were called Wiimotes, right?
Nunchucks is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
The add-ons to them. Yeah, you played it with. I believe you had to play it with a Wiimote and a nunchuck because there was a lot of motion control in the Wii version.
I'm gonna guess then. I mean, I've not researched this. I'm gonna guess this version includes the same control format, but using the Joy-Cons, the motion controls and the Joy-Cons, right?
I wouldn't be surprised at it if it did.
I'm just looking through it now. So, players Darth Vader's secret apprentice, unleash epic force powers, local multiplayer duel mode. I don't remember that. And then travel again in normal story mode.
The Wii version. So it's from that comment. I guess it sounds like they're carrying over the Jedi Force duels multiplayer mode. It was a one-on-one fighting mode.
So I'm reading the official coverage here, and it says, similar to the 2008 release on the Nintendo Wii, use the Nintendo Joy-Con motion controls to truly feel the destructive power of the Force. Yeah, I think I'll be giving that one a hard miss. That one comes on the 20th of April, so avoid that one. Were there any other failures? I mean, one of my failures, one that I immediately thought I didn't really need to see what was No Man's Sky. I just feel as though the hardware isn't anywhere near as powerful enough to make that game as enjoyable as you might experience on PC or on other consoles.
Has been patched so many times that now they've patches for the next gen. It looks graphically amazing on iSeries X.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how exactly it's going to look.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with like the games like The Witcher 3. You know, there are these like amazing graphical experiences if you run them on good hardware, but behind them they always have like a good solid story, right? They have a good campaign, something that kind of immerses you, and you can kind of excuse frame rate drops when things get a little bit hectic. I think some of the like the AAA games that you see on the Nintendo Switch can suffer from frame drops sometimes when there's that much stuff going on the screen, which isn't too bad, you know. I mean, there could be worse things. I'd rather a game be very good and suffer from small frame rate issues than, you know, the story be absolutely trash and it still run like trash. So, you know, there are excuses that can be made. It's just that Nintendo's policy on the Nintendo Switch seems to be this kind of like port haven. Does that make any sense? There seems to be so many ports from so many generations of consoles of games that are being made accessible digitally to people that own the Nintendo Switch.
Well, and I think that it comes from just looking at the hardware as portable as and accessible as it is, that if you can get the game to run on it, then why wouldn't you just port it to that platform?
Mm-hmm.
And then you give people the opportunity to play it on the go. You know, but then, like Wiz brought up the Steam Deck, you know, there's going to be competition eventually, but for years, the Switch has just been the dominant force in the handheld market. taking over the place of the 3DS, because Nintendo has just had a chokehold on that market for decades. So if you had that opportunity to be able to port a title over to that platform, then why the heck wouldn't you?
All right, okay. So I was talking about trying to play these big AAA experiences on a Nintendo Switch, and there being some games where I feel as though they could be ported over, but it's not the ideal experience. Giving No Man's Sky as an argument to that. We haven't talked about the new Kirby game that got announced. Which is quite funny, really, because we haven't had a new Kirby game in a very long time, and Kirby is a star of the Nintendo console, right? He is maybe not a console seller, but he's always been like a prevalent character in their library on every generation, really. So it's nice that we're getting a brand new, not a port, not a remake, but a brand new title for Kirby. Regardless of all those ugly internet memes surrounding it right now, with him swallowing cards and whatnot. And some heinous creations with that Akira meme with the bike.
What are you talking about? That's amazing.
Amazing as it is, it scarred me and I can't unsee it. With some of the other things that you've seen Kirby wrapped around. But it seems to me that the general consensus on this game is meh. Nobody really wants it. And the gameplay is kind of meh. Nobody's really getting that excited for it. Yeah, Nintendo seemed to be pushing very, it's at the top of their featured gaming list. It was a prevalent piece of the Nintendo Direct on the 9th. I believe in the previous Nintendo Direct they covered it as well. So that they are pushing heavily for it, but nobody seems to want it. Why do you think that is? Why do you think nobody wants a Kirby game?
I think it's probably because Kirby, like you said, Kirby's never been a system seller. He's never really been front and center in Nintendo's first-party IPs. He's always been kind of a background character. You just kind of expect him to be there, but you always just kind of give his games a pass. It's like, well, they had to make a Kirby game, so there it is. Not to say that there haven't been past Kirby games that have been entertaining to play. Like Epic Yarn is really is probably one of the standout Kirby games to me. But I don't think they really they didn't really know how to market it, because I think people are still kind of confused as to what kind of game it's going to be. Is it going to be more of a free roaming 3D platformer, or is it going to be fairly linear, or like you go into small stages like Mario 64? All they wanted to do was just show off this mouthful mode, which was kind of, as you put it, was kind of disgusting.
Kirby can swallow anything.
Yeah.
Okay. The internet's definitely not going to do some dirty things with that, but the less said about that, the better. Okay, so talking about terrible performances, I think that leads nicely into the next subject, which is Cyberpunk 2077. I'm sure everybody's bored of Cyberpunk 2077 and all the negative opinions people have about that game following its famous flump at launch, with all the bugs and the issues the game had. Across not just the console versions but also the PC releases. It's obviously at its patch. I think it was, the 1.5 patch, which brings a slew of changes, a slew of improvements, and more importantly, it brings the experience for next-gen console owners for the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S. They've added a bunch of features, a bunch of exclusive features, they say, including ray-traced local light shadows. So, ray-traced light shadows. Native achievement support for those consoles, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. 2 new graphical modes for those 2 consoles as well, which I think they were called Performance Mode and Ray Tracing Mode. Performance Mode was 4K 60 FPS. And of course, ray tracing mode is ray tracing turned on at 30 FPS, but they do like a fake upscale, like an upscaled 4K to try and bring the resolution up a little bit. But like I said, it's locked at 30 FPS.
Which I know has you just cringing, Hawk. Right?
It has me. Yeah, I mean, I recently tried. Obviously the other feature they announced was that the game was getting a free trial for people to try. So it's a 5-hour timed free trial. It's the full game, from what I could tell. You download the full game. It was a sizable download size that I had to do on my console. And I tried it for 2.5 hours. I experienced maybe one glitch. The concept of time trials doesn't really bother me. I know there was a bit of negative opinion on that. You know, while you're in the pause screen, it shouldn't count towards the time playing the game, etc., etc., etc. But I suppose the point I'm trying to get to is that this 1.5 patch has kind of reignited a lot of people's passions for playing Cyberpunk right now. You know, as of you know, Twitch today, it's one of the most popular categories of people playing that people are in right now, playing video games. And so I wanted to get your opinion on Cyberpunk and what you've seen so far. Is this a step in the right direction? Does this solve all of the problems? What are our thoughts? You know, I've got my own thoughts and opinions on it, having played the recent patch. And I'm sure you guys have either watched people play this game, read the coverage, or tried it for yourself before the patch.
Yeah, I think I think it's a little late. I mean, if you had purchased the game, you're probably going to try the patch. But I think what Cyberpunk is trying to do, what the game developer is trying to get more sales out of the game by including that trial.
Yeah.
People like me that didn't buy the game at launch just because we were like, oh, I heard about it.
Yeah.
Then it was really a hard failure on them because, you know, this patch came out very late. I mean, Cyberpunk came out quite some time ago, it feels like now.
Yep.
So, I mean, those negative reviews are still there. They're not going to go away. I can name a few other games where this has happened before, one of them being No Man's Sky, which got horrible reviews at launch, and now it's a great game. But it's hard to attract newer players to it.
So the game actually came out on the 10th of December in 2020.
Yeah.
So over a year ago.
Yeah, and it's difficult to recover from that. But again, if as you said, it's a popular category on Twitch right now. I'm sure people that have the game are going to jump in and try to play. It's just to see if that patch actually ignites people's passions to actually start playing it again.
So let me get this right. You're saying that most of the people that already purchased the game, already spent their money, would be the ones re-downloading the game with the update and playing it again just to see whether the experience they get now is better than the initial experience they got back in December last year. December in 2020, not even last year now. It was the year before that. Yeah. Okay. And how about you, Retro? What are your thoughts on this patch? And do you think it's too late for CD Projekt Red to redeem themselves?
I think it's too late for them to redeem themselves in this specific instance. I think CD Projekt Red, they shit the bed with the launch of Cyberpunk. And so the IP, as it stands right now, has probably been
too tainted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you don't think that no amount of patches, no amount of fixes, improvements to the experience are going to do away with that? The only thing I could ever see them doing to really rekindle any long-term interest in the game, especially to make amends with a lot of the day one purchasers. I mean, this is more or less the game, according to some people, more or less the game that it should have been at launch. But the only thing I could really see them doing to truly make amends is to create any sort of DLC campaign and offer it for free. Okay, so like DLC should like a season pass should be free for anybody who already owned the game.
Yeah, at least like one wave of DLC come out with it, and it has to be substantial.
Right.
It has to be, like 15-hour campaign maybe.
We're talking something like what they did with The Witcher 3 with Heartstone, I think it's called, right, and Blood of Wine or Wine of Blood or whatever it's called.
Yeah, Heart of Stone and Blood and Wine. Yeah.
Those.
Yeah, it was something sizable like that. Maybe not quite as big because Blood and Wine was like quite expensive.
Huge.
Yeah, but something like Heart of Stone, I think, is actually a good analogy to make as far as like total amount of content that was added in a DLC release, offered for free and offered to everybody that has a purchased license of the game, regardless of when they purchased it, not just to the early adopters. But at least that is going to make amends, at least in some fashion. And and bring this game out of purgatory, which is where it's been for the last year and a half.
So I'm taking then the patch, this patch and all the recent hype and coverage it's getting right now hasn't driven you to want to re-download and start the game again. You don't think until they offer something more sizable than just updating the base game and doing that for free, only if they ever do that will you ever think to be brought back into that fold again?
Yeah, because I do have it on Steam and I've played a grand total of like an hour and a half of it. Mm-hmm. Not that I really experienced any of the technical snafus, because when I got it, it was after Christmas of 2020. So a lot of that, like that first major hot fix that they released for the game had already come out, and so the major bugs that a lot of people were seeing on streams, which were hilarious, but a lot of them were game breaking too, had already been patched out of the game.
Yeah, the combat AI and the crowd the crowds being thinned out, and the city streets being empty.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people were commenting on, is that the game just felt the game world just felt dead after that first major patch. Yeah. And I just didn't see a point in playing it, because people were still ragging on it. It is one of those instances where I kind of jumped on the negative bandwagon. It was just like, oh yeah, Cyberbug.
Yeah. So you still think the game deserves all the negativity even today? Would you say it still deserves, as a new player coming into the game, if you experienced a couple of bugs, do you think the site? What I'm trying to ask you is, do you think today, right now, it deserves all the negativity that it got?
I think it deserved it at the time. Do I think it still deserves to be ragged on? No, because I don't know really the first thing about how difficult it is to produce a game, especially under really harsh time constraints.
Especially one that was widely covered as that one. That one seemed to be around absolutely everywhere, no matter where you looked. Advertisements, coverage. Every person on the planet wanted to play that game before it, as soon as it got announced, and then it took them a really long time for it to come out, and then it was delayed several times. And they kept producing all the promotional content. There were even cars, prototype cars being built specifically covering motorbikes, all kinds of stuff that were made to cover this game and to spread awareness that this game is coming out, for it only to come out and be a complete flop. I can't think. Can you think of another time a game this ramped up, full of hype, ever failed as hard as it did in modern times?
Daikatana.
You think?
Daikatana is the first thing that comes to mind.
There's a few that's happened to. I don't know if you heard of Warcraft 3 Reforged.
No, there might be a reason why, though. I'm not a huge Warcraft person.
What game? What are we talking about? What? They remade Warcraft 3? That's news to me. No, that game. Wait, what?
More recent, if you guys heard of the new Battlefield game, Battlefield 2042, that also got really negative press and from players because of all the extensive.
Yeah, I saw an article on that today saying, or the developers blaming COVID and blaming
Halo.
Halo, that was right. Halo Infinite, that's right. Imagine using another game. Imagine blaming another game's popularity as a result of your game not doing well. You can't imagine these things. But yeah, my own personal experience with Cyberpunk is very little. I bought the game I actually pre-ordered the super expensive £250 collector's edition with the statue, stickers, art books, all of the bells and whistles, because like everybody else, I got kind of caught up in the hype, and I would consider myself a fan of the genre, having read multiple books in that kind of arena, movies, all pop culture stuff. I'm really into it, music. So I was swept up in it, only to kind of take a big, swallow a sour pill, swallow my pride almost, and admit that the game probably isn't what I hope it's going to be. So I actually cancelled that pre-order, and it was for the PlayStation 4 as well, mind you.
Dodged a giant bullet.
Yeah, and I actually bought the version of it on GOG because I saw, GOG is owned by CD Projekt Red. I saw that the proceeds to that were going to go straight to the developer, and no one was going to take a cut. And I thought, you know what, they deserve it. I'll buy it there. And then the game launched, and like you said, I knew. I was so glad I dodged that bullet. I mean, the statue might be worth something, negative press is still press, it's still coverage. People know what Cyberpunk 2077 is, even if it is a huge flop. Another one of those might be, the famous LGN ET game, right? The Atari game that was made by Atari, not LGN, sorry. Yeah. Was it LGN? I don't remember.
That wasn't
but yeah, that was a huge flop, and buried in the sand and all that jazz. But everybody knows still of it these days, and the games, the game can be worth a lot of money if you get a complete copy of it boxed in good condition, even if it's an awful game. So saying that, maybe buying a collector's edition in a few years' time, it still actually might be worth money. People will buy it. I know that the figures for The Witcher 3 go for insane amounts of money. That people are willing to spend, People are asking ludicrous money. People are willing to pay ludicrous money for collector's edition statues. I think there's the one with Geralt and a griffin, fighting a griffin or something like that. I know that one is fairly common, but it goes for a fair amount of money on the internet through the second-hand markets. But yeah, I mean, I think Cyberpunk, having played this demo now and not having played it since buying that version, I've not even played it on PC yet. I actually think they've taken a step in the right direction. I mean, like I say, I've only experienced 1 to 2 hours in the game myself, so I can't really give it a fair criticism. I had one bug, one glitch that was fairly annoying, and that was during the tutorial phase as well. But I'll give them credit. They're still spending time and effort on trying to deliver the experience they promised us at launch, and I would rather them do that than completely ignore the fact, ignore the elephant in the room and just move on to another IP. I actually think CD Projekt need to be able to do that, and they need to be able to redeem or create some kind of redemption arc, so whatever IP they decide to work on next isn't going to be instantly tainted with reputation that they got for Cyberpunk 2077. Because people have very short memories when it comes to things they dislike. We're all sheep. We all follow a trend. That's why they're called trends. Whether that's something you like or something you hate. One thing I did know, though, recently is that most of the developers, I didn't realise this, but there were some very key members of the team that helped develop Witcher 3, which people are saying is accredited to some of its better successes, or weren't a part of the Cyberpunk team. They'd left at the end of the development cycle for The Witcher 3, and they'd done that due to harsh working conditions, crunch, unfair pay, whatever. I think there were some other things as well. And they, this week, got coverage. They've announced that they've started a new studio. So these guys this major part of the Witcher 3 team, when they worked under CD Projekt Red, have started their very own studio to work on their own IPs, which I think is interesting.
And what's the studio's name?
I will have to look that up, but let's have a look.
8-Track Project Blue.
One question I was going to ask you, I mean, last week's podcast we spoke about Activision Blizzard being bought up by Sony. Sorry, Bungie being bought up by Sony and Activision Blizzard being bought up by Microsoft. Could you see a scenario where CD Projekt Red could be caught up in that wind? Do you think? Because Activision Blizzard have a fairly negative name right now with all the press that's surrounding their business, not the games, the business themselves and the people in charge of that business. Yeah. And they were bought by Microsoft, and in a way, we said this last time. By being bought by Microsoft, they align themselves with something that is successful and something that's family friendly, and like a reimagining of the business, a reorganization, because that's what they're going to go through eventually when it gets swallowed up completely by Microsoft. Do you think CD Projekt Red could benefit from something like that? Being completely bought out by Sony and kind of realigned, refocused, rebranded, resold with new IPs or fixing existing IPs?
Yeah, I think so. And of course, I got to realize these that's not final. I mean, of course, Microsoft's purchase is not final, pending legal ramifications of
reviewed by the FTC.
Building some kind of giant monopoly on video games.
Yeah, because I think CD
that
Projekt
hasn't happened before, has it?
No, yeah. Well, the studio that kind of branched off CD Projekt Red, they're called Rebel Wolves. It says here that the company is joined by other former Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077 developers, with their plans to create their first AAA story-driven title soon. To announce more about it soon. So, yeah, it's apparently the director for The Witcher 3 as well. The guy who directed that game is part of this Rebel Wolves studio. So I'm sure we'll be learning more about that soon.
So it kind of sounds like with that announcement with this new studio, Rebel Wolves, kind of sounds like the groundwork for Cyberpunk's failure had actually already been laid years and years before the game came out.
It sounds like it.
And just, the fans were,
I think
nary the wiser.
Yeah, I think maybe without me being involved in that business, it is very difficult for us to say these people were exclusively the reason why The Witcher 3 did so well. I'm sure it was a combined effort from hundreds, if not thousands of people to get that game to where it eventually ended up. And just because these people didn't necessarily work on the entirety of Cyberpunk, or maybe only worked at the start of it, or didn't even work on it in total, is the reason why that game failed. It only takes there's only so many talented developers in the world that can't be replaced by other developers, right? So it's very difficult for us to say that's the reason why, but that seems to be the consensus on the internet. Cyberpunk wasn't as good because the developers that made The Witcher 3 good, or at least the team that led the senior team that led The Witcher 3 to its success, weren't present or weren't prevalent in the development of Cyberpunk.
Yeah. But whether they could be bought, I mean, it's always a possibility. Like Wiz said.
They could be bought. The question is, do you think they should be? Do you think it would be a good move for them to be bought out?
Yeah. Well, what I was going to get to is that they really don't have these kind of purchases are largely driven by IP acquisitions, and CD Projekt Red has exactly 2 IPs to their name.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, one of them is a phenomenal success.
Yeah.
But the other one has also, has stained their reputation because of how poorly developed and launched it was. But they've, like you said, Hawk, they've been trying to make amends, and I certainly don't scoff at their attempts to try to patch Cyberpunk to be the game.
Yeah, I mean, we can
been from launch.
We can draw a comparison to No Man's Sky, right? What happened there.
Hello Games definitely set the standard for this kind of scenario where a game basically launched half finished and met hardly any of the marketing promises that were made over the years of its development. But what is it that you hear people say about No Man's Sky anymore? You hear somebody say, "Oh, No Man's Sky, haha, that game was so fucking shit," and then you have a slew of people come in and say, "It was, but now it's actually a pretty good game."
Yeah,
that's what you hear all the time now.
Small. It's a small fan base, and that's what I'm thinking. 2077, it's going to be a core fan base that's going to like it, just like No Man's Sky. Yeah,
and it's going to be these people that push it back into the spotlight. If it isn't already being pushed into the spotlight as we speak, it's going to be this core of people, these content creators, this coverage that it gets, these kind of diehard fans that look for the positives and they kind of shoo away the negatives, or and push it forward. Basically, these are the guys that the patches are made for. They're not made for trying to sell it to the masses anymore. They're made to try and sell it to the core diehard fans that have stuck with it through thick and thin. And essentially trying to actively resell it to other players. It's not that bad anymore. Don't listen to the coverage. Don't read the notes. Try it for yourself. Honestly, you'll love it. Those kinds of people.
I tell that about No Man's Sky all the time. Nobody listens to me.
Well,
By the way, we have mechs now, guys. Mechs.
Holy shit, mechs? Really?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Added mechs with the latest patch.
Is there mech combat?
Yes.
Oh fuck! I may actually have to play that game again now.
I mean, I'm guessing you already own it, so I'm sure these are all free
PS4,
updates, right?
So I could get it on PS5.
Oh no, actually. They changed it, didn't they? They released like a whole new version called like New Frontiers or something like that, right? So there was the base version,
they
and
come
then
out with a patch every few months that and they called it patch a new name.
Right.
The game's available on Game Pass. You want to
Oh.
just play it, and it includes all the patches.
Well, there you go. That sold it for me anyway. I'd be tempted to try it again. I mean, I have been tempted to try Cyberpunk. The only reason I tried it on the PS5 was the DualSense, because they said they supported DualSense, and I thought, you know what, that would be really cool if I could play that game with all the DualSense stuff. And yeah, it is pretty cool. Would I choose to replace my lofty PC for a couple of vibrations on a controller? I'm still 50-50, I'm not going to lie. I am still 50-50.
Really?
Yeah.
50-50. I thought it would have been a little bit more skewed.
I am still 50-50. I'm undecided right now. But thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. This is going to be, this evening, this afternoon, this morning. This is going to be the end of this week's podcast. We've gone slightly over time, but that's absolutely fine. Are there any closing sentiments from any of you guys? Anything else you wanted to raise? I've covered everything we wanted to speak about today.
Legends Arceus is not terrible. It's a great game. Play it.
How about you, Wiz? Any closing sentiments?
We have mechs now, guys. Mechs. So download No Man's Sky.
I'm sold.
Excellent. And my closing sentiment is Cyberpunk isn't that bad anymore, guys. Please go and play it. It's absolutely amazing now. It's at the point where it should have been 2 years ago. No, I'm only joking. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. And until next time, peace and love.